Have you ever heard the claim that black people are the true descendants of the ancient Israelites? It's a belief held by some groups known as Black Hebrew Israelites, and it's a claim that's gaining traction. But what's the real story behind this belief? And what does history actually tell us? In this video, we're going to delve into the history and the scriptures to separate fact from fiction.
Pardon this small interruption. As you all should know, this is part of the response series to some of the comments left on some of the videos produced by the Truth Be Told project. This is the second response. This is the comment that was left by a person by the name of Trey Harrison 4425. I will now read what he says. This was terrible. The same argument. People don't seem to like to read Deuteronomy 28 in its entirety. Egypt is a spirit, just like Babylon. Egypt is the spirit of captivity, not a nation itself. They were never enslaved in Egypt twice. That has to be one of the most interesting things I've heard. We must be honest. Some comments can't be taken seriously enough to respond to. What we believe that Trey Harrison 4425 is alluding to is that Egypt represents oppression and that Egypt is symbolic of the United States of America. In this video, K-Dub scrutinizes this argument. All right, now let's get back to K-Dub.
What up, everyone, and welcome back to the Truth Be Told project. I'm your host, K-Dub. The history of both the ancient Israelites and the African diaspora is complex and filled with both triumph and tragedy. It's understandable that people seek connections to the past, especially when searching for identity and meaning. However, it's crucial to base our understanding of history on solid evidence and sound interpretation. Today, we're going to examine the claim that Deuteronomy 28:68 specifically applies to African Americans and the interpretation of Egypt as solely symbolic of oppression. We'll explore the historical context of these passages and address some of the key issues with this interpretation. Deuteronomy 28 is a powerful chapter in the Bible, but it's essential to understand its original context. When we approach the scriptures, we have to ask, what is the historical and literal context of this particular writing? To understand the context of Deuteronomy, we must understand that it's part of Moses' farewell address to the ancient Israelites before they entered the Promised Land. It outlines the blessings for obedience and the curses for disobedience, a covenant between God and that specific people at that specific time. Focusing on just one verse, like 28:68, while ignoring the rest of the chapter, is a flawed approach. The curses describe a range of calamities, many of which have already been fulfilled in Jewish history. The interpretation of Deuteronomy 28:68 as applying specifically to African Americans and the symbolic interpretation of Egypt as oppression are central to some Black Hebrew Israelite beliefs. Let's break down the problems with this interpretation. 1. Context of Deuteronomy 28, covenantal. Context. Deuteronomy 28 is part of Moses' farewell address to the Israelites before they enter the Promised Land. It outlines the blessings for obedience to God's commands and the curses for disobedience. The entire chapter, including verse 68, must be understood within this covenantal context. It's addressed to the historical Israelites, not just verse 68. Focusing solely on verse 68 while ignoring the preceding verses is a flawed interpretive practice. The curses in Deuteronomy 28 describe a range of calamities, including military defeat, famine, disease, and exile. To isolate one verse and apply it selectively to a specific group while ignoring the rest of the chapter is cherry-picking scripture. Historical fulfillment. Many of the curses described in Deuteronomy 28, including exile and scattering among the nations, have already been fulfilled in the history of the ancient Israelites. Jewish history in particular records numerous instances of these calamities. 2. The Egypt symbolism argument, or the literal versus figurative. While the Bible does use figurative language, it's crucial to distinguish between literal and symbolic meanings. Now, what about the claim that Egypt in Deuteronomy 28:68 is symbolic of oppression, specifically the oppression of African Americans during slavery? While the experience of Egypt can certainly symbolize oppression, interpreting it exclusively in this way disconnects it from its original historical context. The Egypt mentioned here is primarily the literal Egypt from which the Israelites were delivered. Applying it solely to the transatlantic slave trade, which happened thousands of years later, is anachronistic. It imposes a meaning onto the text that its original authors could not have intended. Finally, the claim that Deuteronomy 28:68 applies specifically to African Americans raises several concerns. There's no conclusive genealogical evidence to support the idea that all or even most African Americans are direct descendants of the ancient Israelites. Furthermore, this interpretation often relies on a racialized understanding of Scripture, which can be problematic. It also ignores the suffering and displacement of other groups throughout history. Understanding history and Scripture accurately is crucial. While it's important to acknowledge the pain and injustice experienced by African Americans, it's equally important to base our understanding of the past on solid evidence and sound interpretive principles. Deuteronomy 28, when understood in its historical context, speaks to the covenant relationship between God and the ancient Israelites. It's important to ground these discussions in actual historical events. Here are some key instances of historical fulfillment of the curses in Deuteronomy 28, particularly those that relate to exile and suffering. 1. The Assyrian and Babylonian captivities. Deuteronomy 28:25. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will go out one way to face them, but you will flee before them in 7 ways. Fulfillment. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by Assyria in the 8th century BC, and its people were exiled. The southern kingdom of Judah was conquered by Babylon in the 6th century BC, leading to the exile of many Judeans to Babylon. These events are well documented in the historical books of the Bible, like 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and in extra biblical sources. Deuteronomy 28:64. The Lord will scatter you among all the nations from one end of the earth to the other. Fulfillment. Both the Assyrian and Babylonian exiles resulted in the scattering by ship of Israelites throughout the Assyrian and Babylonian empires. This dispersal marked a significant disruption in the life of the Israelite people. Be mindful this was done by ship. There are a lot of Hebrews that think slaves were only transported by ship during the transatlantic slave trade. We must remember ships were a common form of transportation in ancient days, especially long distances. 2. The Roman destruction of Jerusalem, 70 AD. Deuteronomy 28:49-52. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the ends of the earth, like an eagle swooping down, a nation whose language you do not understand. They will besiege all your cities until the high fortified walls in which you trust fall down throughout your land. Fulfillment. The Roman Empire, a powerful force from afar, besieged Jerusalem in 70 AD. The city fell after a long and brutal siege, and the temple was destroyed. This event is vividly described by the historian Josephus and is a major turning point in Jewish history. Deuteronomy 28:68. The Lord will return you to Egypt in ships by a route I said you would never see again. There you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. Fulfillment. While Egypt in the immediate context refers to the literal Egypt, the principle of being sold into slavery and having no one to redeem them can be seen in the aftermath of the Roman destruction. Many Jews were taken captive and sold into slavery throughout the Roman Empire. 3. Later Jewish persecutions and diaspora. Deuteronomy 28:65-67. Among those nations you will find no repose, no resting place for the sole of your foot. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, eyes weary with longing, and a despairing heart. Your life will hang in doubt before you. Night and day you will be filled with dread, with no assurance of your life. Fulfillment. Throughout history, Jewish communities have faced persecution, discrimination, and exile in various lands. The diaspora, the scattering of Jews, after the destruction of the Second Temple, continued for centuries, often marked by hardship and insecurity. The experiences of Jews in the Middle Ages, the Spanish Inquisition, and the Holocaust are tragic examples of this. Here are some important considerations. This is not an exhaustive list. There are other verses in Deuteronomy 28 that have found fulfillment in various ways throughout Israelite and Jewish history. Interpretative principles. It's important to interpret these passages within their historical context and according to sound hermeneutical principles. While some fulfillments are clear, others may be more nuanced. While the principles of obedience and the consequences of disobedience can have broader application, applying the curses solely to one group is not supported by the text itself. By exploring these issues with respect and a commitment to truth, we can foster a more informed and productive dialogue about history, identity, and faith. If you've heard these claims before, I challenge you to examine the evidence presented in this video. Don't just accept information at face value. Do your own research and come to your own informed conclusions. Let's engage in a respectful debate about the facts. Remember, don't just live by default, live by design, God's design. K-Dub signing off. Peace.